Okay, so here's a quick little tutorial about how I draw hands, and I'm going to start with just looking at the structure of the hand because it's important. This is how I think about it. I always think of this section right here as being like a big square, and then the fingers here, you'll notice that there's an arch here, and it's important to preserve that arch to make them look good. You don't want your fingers all to be the same length, or it really won't look like a hand, and it won't look good. And sometimes, depending on how you hold the hand, this can become more of a triangle shape. But you always want to make sure that you remember that this finger is always the longest and this finger is the shortest. And then if you think about your thumb always comes off kind of at the base of that square. So if I'm drawing a hand, this is going to be a pretty good sized hand. I usually don't draw this large, but okay, so the thumb comes off here, and then I usually just kind of rough these fingers in to start off with, and then make sure that I get the proportions right. And I tend to keep these two fingers together. It simplifies the shape, and it really, I mean, most of the time when I'm holding my hands, these two fingers are pretty close anyway. Okay, so then I want to come in here, check my proportions. This finger was a little bit long. This one's probably a little bit long right here. Usually I can add some knuckles and do that. That looks pretty good. And the other thing to remember is that your thumb is really two right there, and also your fingers are 3, but what I tend to do is simplify these fingers so that they're just 2, and that makes it a lot easier to draw these, is if you just kind of divide them right there and make it so that you just have two fingers. That's an old animator's trick. Okay, so if I flip it over and do so this is going to be kind of from the side. Sometimes I'll actually draw like a little triangle there, and then this is going to be a hand that's kind of out like this. So it's always important to look at your hands and just kind of pay attention to what they do. And if you look at this, if you hold your hand like this, your pinky is always, if you just kind of flick it out there, your pinky is always going to be out. So this is actually a pretty easy hand shape to draw because the pinky's this way, and then the rest of the fingers just go out like this. And if you want to get really kind of technical about it, make sure you have that middle finger out like that. Of course, another option that you can always do is the old animator's trick of just doing 3 fingers up here instead of 4. They do that because it makes it a lot easier for them to draw those shapes. Fists, usually I start with a big square. You know, fist is, if you look at it, essentially a square. I'm not the best at drawing fists, but I always try to make sure it's not a real square. And if you think about a fist, your knuckle, this top knuckle is always out a little bit more. And so then I'll just kind of do that, add some ridges a little bit, add a thumb, and that's really all you need to do to make those look pretty good. So the other problem that you'll have sometimes too with hands is they won't look right if you don't put the arm in the right spot. So here's a good example of this hand, and if you look at my hand, notice that the arm comes straight up this way, or relatively straight up this way, and then the thumb really comes off on that side. So we want to offset it here and make sure that the wrist comes off like that. And make sure you put it here. In this case, we would have an arm that would go there. I'm going to fix that knuckle here because I don't like that. And then, I don't know, sometimes draw a cuff here. Make sure your cuffs are always a circle. That helps a lot with those too. And